A lot of alternate history scenarios have explored how Germany could have won the Second World War. Some argue that the war was effectively lost when Germany declared war on the Soviet Union, while others point to its declaration of war on the United States. But these scenarios often overlook something fundamental: Hitler's ideology and the goals of the Nazi movement. In this scenario, I want to keep that ideology intact, but assume Hitler becomes more conservative in how he attempts to achieve it. I am assuming that Hitler remains firmly committed to its hatred of Bolshevism and to the idea of German expansion into Eastern Europe, but becomes more cautious about the logistical and military difficulties of conquering and occupying the Soviet Union. Several senior German officers had serious reservations about the strategic risk of opening a war against the Soviet Union, while Britain remained undefeated. However, rather than abandoning Lebensraum entirely, let's assume that Hitler is persuaded to pursue a more limited and strategically achievable version of German expansion in Eastern Europe, while maintaining an uncompromisingly anti-communist stance. Without the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Germany still invades Poland. The campaign would likely take somewhat longer without Soviet intervention from the east, perhaps lasting into October. But Germany would eventually defeat Poland and find itself facing a much longer frontier with the Soviet Union than it had historically. This creates a problem. Germany cannot simply leave the eastern frontier undefended. So, in this scenario, Hitler takes a gamble similar to the one he took in the West. He leaves perhaps 20 to 30 divisions in occupied Poland as a defensive force, while transferring the bulk of the Wehrmacht towards the Western Front. The Soviet Union had just gone through the Great Purge of its military leadership, while the Red Army was about to enter the Winter War against Finland. Stalin's strategy was largely pragmatic. He wanted Germany and the Western powers to exhaust one another before the Soviet Union took advantage of the situation. With the Soviet Union already preparing for war with Finland, opening another major conflict with Germany would be an enormous risk. A Soviet invasion of German-held Poland at this stage will therefore be unlikely. We should also consider Germany's existing alliance with Italy. The Pact of Steel, signed on May 22, 1939, contained a commitment to support the other party if it became involved in military complications with another power. Its Article 3 stated, quote, "If it should happen, against the wishes and hopes of the contracting parties, that one of them becomes involved in military complications with another power or other powers, the other contracting party will immediately step to its side as an ally and will support it with all its military might on land, at sea and in the air." End quote. In our timeline, Italy did not enter the war when Germany invaded Poland, partially because Mussolini considered Italy unprepared for a major conflict. But in this scenario, Germany would be defending itself against a potential Soviet attack. It is therefore not unreasonable to imagine Berlin requesting a limited Italian military contribution to reinforce the eastern frontier, although this remains an assumption rather than an automatic consequence of the treaty. The Soviet Union also had to consider the situation in the Far East. Tensions between Moscow and Tokyo had already produced serious fighting in 1939, giving Stalin another reason to avoid unnecessarily opening a major war in Europe while the Soviet military was still recovering from the Winter War. The fall of France would still be possible. Germany would still invade the Low Countries, Denmark and Norway, and the rapid collapse of France would once again transform the strategic situation in Europe. But now Hitler faces a different problem. The Soviet Union has not been given a sphere of influence in the Baltic states. Rather than accepting a Soviet occupation, Hitler could decide that Germany's security requires the Baltic states to remain outside Soviet control. In this scenario, Germany intervenes to secure Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, presenting the move as a defensive measure against Soviet expansion and the spread of Bolshevism. The coup in Yugoslavia and the subsequent German invasion could still occur in 1941, although the exact circumstances would inevitably differ. Germany would gain additional territory and strategic depth in the Balkans, while its relations with Romania, Hungary, Bulgaria and Finland could provide a broader anti-Soviet security system. Germany could also eventually turn its attention towards Switzerland. Operation Unbound, the German plan for an invasion of Switzerland, had already been seriously considered after the fall of France. In this timeline, with no Eastern campaign consuming the Wehrmacht, Switzerland could become a more attractive target. Nazi ideology viewed the German-speaking Swiss as part of the wider German Volk, making the annexation of at least the German-speaking parts of Switzerland consistent with Hitler's broader vision of bringing ethnic Germans into the Reich. Its industrial capacity, financial importance and strategic position in Central Europe would provide additional incentives. Most importantly, Germany would no longer need to launch Operation Barbarossa. Instead of committing millions of men to an enormous war of annihilation against the Soviet Union, Germany could concentrate on consolidating its continental empire, strengthening its defensive positions in Eastern Europe and suppressing resistance in occupied territories. The territories under German control could still be reorganized according to Nazi plans. A German administration resembling the general government could continue to govern occupied Poland, while the Baltic territories could eventually be incorporated into an administration resembling the historical Reichskommissariat Ausland. The crucial difference is that Germany's eastern expansion would be far more limited than the historical vision of conquering the Soviet Union itself. Without the catastrophic losses of the Eastern Front, Germany would retain far more manpower, equipment and experienced soldiers. Instead of continuously fighting to hold an enormous front hundreds of thousands of kilometers deep inside the Soviet Union, the Wehrmacht could concentrate on fortifying the territory it already controlled. The result would not necessarily be a German victory in the traditional sense, but it could create something very different from the historical war, a heavily fortified German-dominated continental Europe, protected by a large army that had never been bled white on the Eastern Front. The question then becomes, could Britain and eventually the United States still break a German fortress Europe, or would Hitler's decision to abandon his maximalist Eastern ambitions have made the Third Reich far more difficult to defeat? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe.